Casualties in this battle against inflation, public sector workers, of course, being one, mortgage holders being another. To that end, I'm joined in the studio for the next half an hour by Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Housing and Community Secretary Labour MP for Wigan, to take your calls. 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can, of course, text 84850. To be honest, that's the coward's way out. Get on the phone. And you can watch us live too on Global Player. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. I know you've had a busy day, not least because you've been meeting some of the mortgage brokers, some of the financial advisors about what you would do, what you would want them to do in this situation. So what is it you got from them regarding commitments to help people out?
Well, we actually got a very strong sense that they're doing absolutely everything that they can at the moment, but they're quite constrained in what they can offer people. We heard some incredibly heartbreaking stories about people for whom there are just no options when they come to remortgage at the moment, and products that are being pulled from the market on an hourly basis. So offering people rates that they thought they could afford, and then finding that within 24 hours those rates have gone up to cost people an extra £150 a month was the difference in 24 hours that somebody quoted to us. So, what they really want us to do is fix the holes in the existing support system. There is some support from banks and lenders for mortgage holders at the moment, but there isn't enough. It's not available to everybody. And more than that, actually, we just got a very strong message that there's no way out of this crisis without building significant amounts of housing, and that's what we intend to do.
We're going to come on to that in a moment. Let's get to some calls. Hassan's in Westminster. Hi, Hassan.
Hi there. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Look, Bank of England has raised interest rates about 13 times since December 21. And with very limited impact on inflation. My own mortgage has gone up by more than £1,000 a month in this period.
£1,000 a month?
Yep, absolutely. And which is very difficult for me, but I can imagine it can even be worse for people who are in the bottom sort of quartile, etc., because their inflation has been even higher.
So what is it you want to ask Lisa Nandy, Hassan, if I can move you to a question?
No, absolutely. What I wanted to know was, does she believe that interest rate rises is the only way to fight inflation? Or how will Labour behave differently? Because from what she's saying, asking banks politely to do more, I don't think goes far enough.
OK. Hassan, thank you very much indeed. Lisa Nandy.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't just ask banks politely to do more, although I think there is a willingness amongst lenders to do more if the request is there from politicians. But what we're proposing is that the regulator steps in and ensures that the measures that the government announced that are voluntary become mandatory. So longer interest-only periods, for example, longer terms on people's mortgages, no impact on credit ratings. These are things that are offered to some people at the moment, but we think they should be offered to all. And there is a precedent for that in COVID-19. The government did this, so we think we could. But on the bigger question about interest rate rises, I think you got to cast your mind back to when we saw interest rates go through the roof last September. One of the causes of that was because of the lack of respect that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng showed for economic institutions and their independence. They bring stability to the system. And that's why we've been very clear that we're not going to question the decisions of the Bank of England. Those are decisions for them. But there is more that the government could and should be doing. And we're determined to keep the pressure on them to do so.
Hassan, thank you for your call. Let me ask you about mortgages more generally, because you've said that you'd introduce a state-backed mortgage insurance scheme with the state acting as a guarantor for prospective homeowners who struggle to save for a large deposit, which would be great news to people who are struggling to get on the housing ladder. So what percentage of that loan would be protected, would be backed?
Well, we're working on that with the big lenders at the moment, but we've got strong support from them for that. What they're seeing at the moment is people who pay very, very high rents in the private rented sector, often more than they'd be paying if they could get a mortgage. They do it for years. I think people often think if you're in the private rented sector, you're a young person who's just left university. Actually, what we're seeing is families in there well into their 30s and 40s still in that position because they haven't got a deposit. And the state in other countries, in Australia and Canada, steps in at that point to help people make the leap, which is what we're proposing to do.
And have you worked out who you would want to be eligible for that scheme?
Well, the banks, the big lenders that Rachel Reeves and I met straight after the Kwasi Kwarteng Liz Truss mini budget, said very clearly that they think that there is a large pool of potential first-time buyers who could be beneficiaries of that without overextending their reach. So, particularly because they're quite keen to take into account people paying rents for long periods of time as part of the affordability checks, which doesn't happen at the moment.
That in existence, aren't there? There's the first-time buyer scheme that George Osborne brought in. How would this be any different?
So there's a temporary scheme that the government has introduced. It's not permanent and it's not very comprehensive, and we're proposing a permanent and comprehensive scheme to bring us in line with other countries. But there's just a very pressing need, I think, to think about housing supply. Mm-hmm. One of the things that George Osborne did was introduce schemes like Help to Buy, but they proved to be incredibly inflationary because...
And this wouldn't be?
Well, because what we're proposing is to build houses alongside it. We're not just going to boost demand and do nothing about supply.
I'll come on to the question. Well, let me ask it now, given you raised it, and Kevin, I will come to your call, but will you set on a figure for house building per year? The government say 300,000, they're nowhere near it, but would Labour in government set a figure?
Well, they've never met it, and
no.
So we think there's absolutely no point in setting a target that you don't concede. Well, the estimates vary. There are more conservative estimates and there are far greater estimates. The 300,000 figure doesn't seem to have any basis in research. It seems to be a figure that the government has just decided to choose, but as I just said, not met. We think the more important thing actually is to restore local housing targets. So at the end of last year, under pressure from his backbenchers, Rishi Sunak got rid of local housing targets. The House Builders Federation thinks that is a hit to the economy of about 17 billion. It's meant house building is projected to fall off a cliff. And what we want communities to do, want councils and development corporations to take a look at the housing need in their area and have a legal duty to meet it.
Let me get to some calls. Dom's in Reading. Dom.
Yeah, good afternoon. Lisa.
Hello.
Is it Lisa Nandy? Yeah?
It is, yeah. Hello. Hi.
You're right there, yeah, sorry, but when is Labour actually going to take responsibility for this current housing crisis? Because this started in 97, when you come to power. I bought my house in 96, yeah, and it was £51,000, so it was well affordable. When I got it, the mortgage payment on it was £215 a month. It was cheaper than council rent by about £20 a month, so that's why I bought it. Come 97, when Tony got in, you flooded the country, okay, with Eastern Europeans. In a 13-year period, you built 65,000 houses. So 2 million people into 65,000 don't go, does it? So what happened to the price of houses?
Well, first of all, the biggest driver in the need for new housing in this country is demographic changes. So people living longer, people living alone, sometimes by choice, sometimes not, and people getting married later, and other factors that have driven that. In government, we started at 193,000 homes on average, which is about 20,000 more than this government has managed. And we did all of that while bringing 500,000 homes up to a decent home standard, because we inherited a housing stock that was damp, cold, mouldy, and hadn't seen investment for a very long time. But you are right to say that there are long routes to the crisis of affordability.
Do you think one of those routes is too many people came in without the necessary infrastructure being in place?
I think infrastructure is an issue, whether you're talking about internal migration within the UK or you're talking about external migration. I mean, to give you an idea, in London, for example, about 750,000 people choose to make their home in London every year. I was one of them 20 years ago. I was a kid from Lancashire who moved to London looking for better opportunities and work and wages, and I found them, but I also found the cripplingly high housing costs and the strain on public services that comes from overheating parts of the economy.
Do you see any link between immigration on the scale that we've had it previously or even currently and a lack of supply of housing?
I think you always have to factor in immigration. You have to factor in population changes. So you have to factor in immigration, you have to factor in birth rates. But other countries have managed to do this. And the way that they've managed to do it is to make sure that they've got the housing supply that they need. We haven't done that. And that's something that we're determined to fix.
Raphael's in Notting Hill. Hi, Raphael.
Hi, Lisa. I'd love to know why you don't just introduce capital gains tax for primary residents so that people stop using their home as an investment, stop speculating, and that there's actually some funds that can pay for all the social housing that you want to build, and we stop making homes. We start making them homes rather than investments.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't committed to doing that, but there was a proposal at the mortgage brokers meeting that Rachel Reeves and I had today about potentially looking at capital gains tax for landlords in the buy-to-let sector who are getting out of the market, and perhaps suspending capital gains tax if they sell on the home to the current tenants, which would help to prevent homelessness amongst people in the private rented sector. It's
How
not
do tenants
something
be able to afford it?
Some would, because they're paying higher rents in the private rented sector than they'd actually be paying in terms of mortgage payments in home ownership. It's not something we've committed to yet, but there are quite a few people looking at various creative ways that we can make things easier for people. Where I really want us to start talking about speculation is around land, though, because a lot of the money that bleeds out of the system is because developers buy up large swathes of land and then sit on it. They wait until the land accumulates in value. They sell it on at inflated prices above market rates.
And you would let councils buy land for lower prices?
We want development corporations to be able to buy land at market rates and then to be able to choose where housing is built, when it's built, and crucially what sort of housing is built.
Well, who sets market rates?
Well, at the moment, that's how the trade in land operates, but it also gets an inflated price. It's known as hope value for land that is then granted, say, planning permission. And we are one of the only major economies that still has this sort of system. A lot of money then bleeds out of the system, but crucially it also means that you can't decide what gets built. I think people accept that we need to build houses, but what they don't want is luxury housing, £500,000 houses in parts of the country where people earn about £25,000 a year.
The Country Land and Business Associations say forcing hard-pressed farmers to sell their land for a fraction of its potential value, only to then, via local authorities, put it in the hands of developers who make hundreds of millions of pounds profit every year, is a strange way to level up the country. That's levelling down, isn't it, for the countryside?
Well, we're not proposing that we should force people to sell at a fraction of the value. We're proposing that they should sell it at market rates.
But they would get less than they otherwise would have done because of the
they won't get
hope value.
They won't get the inflation that they currently get. But this is where a lot of the money bleeds out the system, and this is one of the reasons why we're getting the wrong sort of housing. We're not getting the affordable housing that people need.
Would you stop certain buy-to-let landlords from owning certain numbers of properties?
No, but what we do want to do is make sure that when people are operating as private landlords, whether they're in the social or the private sector, that they're operating to proper standards and that tenants have real power to make sure that they can get repairs done, that they're in safe, adequate homes. One of the ways in which we want the government to do that, but we'll do it if they don't, is to end Section 21 no notice evictions, because you can give people rights on paper, but if when they complain they just get an eviction notice, then those rights are meaningless.
And no rent controls. So Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan in London, Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester have called for rent controls. You say?
Well, at a time when the Tories have crashed the economy, sent interest rates through the roof, we're seeing buy-to-let landlords getting out of the market in every part of the country. I think this could create real problems for the supply in a sector that's already very, very squeezed.
So they're wrong?
Well, I don't think they're wrong to be calling for every tool to be at their disposal to be able to deal with the crisis, but I disagree with them that this will actually help. I think it could cause homelessness. I don't think we should be pursuing measures that make it harder for people at the moment.
When we speak to landlords, particularly buy-to-let landlords, they say one of the other things that's clobbering them at the moment is the drive to make buy-to-let properties have an EPC rating of C by, I think, 2025. Would Labour want to look at that? Would Labour change that to make it easier for people to stay in the market?
We don't want to downgrade the standards. We've got to, in order to reach net zero, in order to bring homes up to standard, we've got a very damp, mouldy housing stock in Britain, cold, drafty homes, and we've got a significant problem. But what we will do is help them. So we've got a commitment to retrofit 19 million homes. We're going to put investment into that from the state. We think that will make a significant contribution to tackling that problem, help to alleviate the pressures on landlords, and also, crucially, help tenants who'll find that their energy bills decrease and their homes improve in standard.
Let's get to another call. Labella's in Hackney. Hi there.
Hello?
Hi, you're on the radio.
Yeah, hi. Quite rightly pointed out before that one of the biggest causes to inflation in the economy or stagnation and restriction is the shortage and supply of housing. The problem is that I've got experience in property development and a lot of social housing development. One of the biggest restrictions is NIMBYism in the planning system and a lot of regulation and driving up standards towards net zero sustainability and of green policies. What is Labour going to do to help it make it more viable and easier to build, particularly social housing?
Well, I couldn't really agree with you more, actually. The planning system has achieved this unique feat of being hated by developers and communities alike. It's very hard to find support anywhere in the country for it in any sector. What we want to do is bring communities in earlier. So we're going to task every part of the country through combined authorities or councils with developing a local plan for their place.
So going back to what the Tories had before they got rid of the targets?
We're going to go further than that because we're going to marry that with a significant programme of devolution so that councils, combined authorities and development corporations actually have the tools that they need to deliver. But we'll bring communities into the process early so that they shape that local plan. They're back in charge of the future of their own communities and have a real say over what they look like. We'll give a new generation of development corporations the ability to buy the land so that they can decide not just what gets built and where, but when it gets built as well, rather than handing developers all the power to decide.
And the commitment to building alongside new homes, new schools, new GPs, because again, that's what people see is the houses might be going up, but there's no infrastructure around to support any new community that moves in.
Yeah, and the government's made that worse by removing what's known as Section 106 and turning it into an infrastructure levy, where the benefits of that funding don't necessarily go to local communities. We've also had a proposal from many council leaders that one of the problems with the Section 106 money as it currently existed was that the infrastructure comes later. And often what communities find is that they're waiting for years to see those improvements to infrastructure that you need if you're going to build significant numbers of housing in a community. So we're looking at whether we can make that easier. Whether you can make that infrastructure come first, I'm not sure, but you could at least look at doing it concurrently.
Let's get to Nick in Cambridge. Hi, Nick.
Hi, you're right.
Your question for Lisa Nandy.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call, and thanks, Lisa, for your time. So I'm a deputy head teacher and a Senko at a school. I've been in the education sector for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of change, obviously. And I think one of the biggest changes is access to resources for supporting special needs children and especially mental health. Every year we seem to get less and less, and every year, we have to do more and more. And a good example is I'm having to buy in mental health support for children privately using school budgets because it's an 18-month waiting list for local authority care. So I'm just basically wondering what Labour's plans are to effectively bring our systems back to how they used to, not effectively used to be, but, what are you going to do, I guess, to support special needs children in the future? How are you going to kind of repair the system?
That's a really welcome question, and it sort of links a little bit as well, because one of the things that we hear a lot is that the problems that a lot of children have is because they're coming to school not just families under severe financial pressure as well, but also overcrowded, poor housing conditions, which make it very, very difficult. But particularly in terms of mental health provision, we're committed to significantly expanding mental health provision in schools, because we know that this is a crisis that can't wait. We're going to fund that as part of our pledge to equalise VAT, to end the VAT tax break on private schools.
Hang on. That money, so the IFS said that money was about 1.3 to 1.5 billion, so slightly below what Labour was offering. And we were told only last week by the Shadow Education Secretary that money was going to go to help fund teachers' pay.
So we've got three components to that pledge, which we've costed, and we're confident that we can deliver within the 1.3 billion envelope. In fact, under that, around 1 billion. One is expanding mental health provision. The second is a retention bonus for teachers at the early stages of their career who are currently getting out quit pretty early. It's causing a real problem. And the other is to expand the teaching workforce by recruiting just over 6,000 new teachers, and we think we can pay for all of that through the 1 billion, and we've got independent experts to look at it, and they're confident that we can do it.
One of the things that they have said in that report, and we discussed it on the show yesterday, that the attrition rate from saying that VAT is going to be put on school bills is going to mean about 18,000 children come out of private sector and into the public sector. And people are furious about it. People are absolutely furious that it is a political decision that is going to mean that their child's education is uprooted. I guess you would say that that is a pain that Labour is willing to bear.
Well, politics is about choices, and this is a choice from us to make fairer decisions. We can't go on with a situation like the caller that you just described, the deputy head who we just heard from, Nick, the deputy head teacher, who's telling us about the very real crisis for many families and many children in the school system at the moment. We think it's fairer to make sure that the playing field is levelled, and if there are children who then their parents choose for them to go into the state sector, what we can then say to them is that the state sector will be under less pressure because we're investing in the resources and the capacity in the state sector
for their
as well.
own children. I mean, I take the broader point about raising the standards in secondary school, in state schools. Everybody would agree with that. But to the parent whose child is now uprooted out of the school that they liked and put into a school that might be failing and really struggling, what would you say to them as the reason why that needs to happen and that's fair?
I guess I would just say that, education is obviously a very personal thing, and stability for children we completely get is really important. I've got my own child. It matters. It really matters. It matters to the whole family, but it matters particularly to the child. We're not anticipating significant numbers of people transferring from one school to another as a consequence of this. But what we do anticipate is that for those parents currently who are really struggling, their kids are struggling, they're not getting the help and support that they need, and it's breaking their teachers' hearts because they're not able to provide the support that they know that the children in front of them need. We've got to have an answer. We've got to make fairer choices, and we're not going to shy away from taking difficult decisions that help most people in this country to live better lives.
0345 6060 973 is the number. 84850 to text. You can tweet at LBC. Lisa Nandy is with us for the next 5 minutes or so. There's a quote that I'd like to put to you back on the issue about mortgages, because obviously, unsurprisingly, we're getting a lot of calls about that. From Santander UK's mortgage director about the increase in mortgage costs that there is. Quote, "We've affordability stress tested at a higher interest rate at about 6% at the time of application. We've understood that customers can bear a higher interest rate, and that seems to be bearing out at this moment in time."
Yep.
So the banks know that people will pay this, even as interest rates rise to 6% and the costs go up to 6.6%, I think, on a 2-year fixed. Do you think that's true? The bank's telling people you can afford this?
I think there is some truth in it. That particularly, we've heard this from the mortgage brokers. We've also heard it from lenders as well. That because the stress test was relatively high, although it's now higher, that many people, what they're finding is they can afford the housing costs, but they're having to make significant sacrifices in their own personal lives.
So they
in
need
order
to wear
do
it. They are the people, when the Bank of England chief economist said someone needs to eat inflation, in a roundabout way, it is mortgage holders who are being told, eat it.
Well, they're being told that. I don't think that's fair or right. Essentially, mortgage holders, private renters, all are paying the price for the Tories crashing the economy and sending borrowing costs and interest rates through the roof. And people will, for a very long time, the lenders have been quite clear about that. The question is what we can do to help and support them in the interim. And particularly, I just want to make this point because I think it's important. There are people who will not be able to bear this. The independent agency Lichfields, which is well respected, estimates that over 500,000 more people are going to become sofa surfers with no permanent home as a consequence of what is happening in the housing market at the moment. And that is unconscionable, but that is on the government.
Kevin's in Basingstoke. Hi, Kevin.
Hiya.
Your question to Lisa Nandy.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
Should the richest 1% pay more tax?
Well, I think the principle that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the greatest burden. There used to be a political consensus around that. If you remember, David Cameron used to use that phrase, although he then went on to do precisely the opposite. But we're not really in the business of saying to people at the moment we want them to pay more in tax. We want to make fairer choices. The tax burden on working people is at the highest rate for a generation. And when the cost of everything is going up, we're not just seeing people at the bottom end of the income spectrum struggling, we're seeing everybody struggling.
Even the top 1%?
Well, lots of people are struggling at the moment, and we're not very interested in trying to increase the tax burden. What we want to do is make fairer choices. So you'll have seen through things like...
That is a fairer choice. My school's falling apart, the building's crashing down, and you've got the richest getting richer at this time. Why not go after them more?
Well, we've looked at where we think that the parts of the economy can take more of the strain. So, for example, the windfall tax that we've proposed to close the loopholes in that on the big energy producers. At a time when the chief executive, the head of BP, is saying tax us more, it seems to us absurd that the government is loading those costs onto small businesses and families across the country. Our proposal on private schools and equalising VAT with the state sector these are examples of where we think that we could do things differently.
But those are money-raising measures that Labour have announced before. There is going to be no money-raising measure through increased taxation, even as Kevin suggests, on the top 1%.
Our plan is to grow the economy. There's no route out of this without economic growth. We've had over a decade of slow and sluggish and at times non-existent economic growth. And the truth is you can't keep cutting up the pie in different ways when there isn't enough in it to go around.
Sounds Liz Trussy. She talks about growing the pie.
I'm from Wigan. I reserve the right to talk about pies. I was talking about them long before Liz Truss.
But it's the same mantra. You need to grow the pie.
Well, the trouble with her was that she was after sugar rush growth. She was just trying to, lift all the constraints on bankers' bonuses and get rich quick. It was nonsense. It clearly wasn't going to work, and instead it crashed the economy. We're looking at sustained growth driven by people in every part of the country, good jobs in parts of the country that haven't seen them for a long time, money back in people's pockets. That's how you grow the economy sustainably.
Caroline in Shrewsbury. Does Keir Starmer hate tree huggers? Why are Labour rowing back on their green pledges? It's a vote loser from me. The question, I think, comes from an article in the Sunday Times which suggested that at a shadow cabinet meeting, Keir Starmer said that he hated tree huggers. Lisa Nandy, I guess you attend those, so did he?
I'm fairly sure that Keir Starmer doesn't hate anybody, actually. He's one of the politest people I've ever met.
So that's nonsense.
But no,
say that.
He doesn't, actually. And the transition to net zero is not just something that's important to us because we care about climate change, we care about the planet, and we care about the environment. It's always been a core part of the socialist tradition. We're responsible for national parks and that whole movement. We've consistently gone out and championed environmental policies. But there's another reason why this really matters. It matters because if we don't get on the front foot in winning the race for those jobs of the future, we're going to find that we've got serious economic problems in this country.
Step back. It was 28 billion a year. It's now from the start of Labour's government. It's now not going to be at some stage if the economy mends itself. But who knows when that's going to happen by? Massive step back.
Tom, you sound so cynical. This is not.
Well, I'm sorry, but it is. It's a step back.
But look, the country.
Me cynical?
I know. I'm going to have to take you out for a pint after this, I think, and cheer you up. There's a real problem here because the country has taken a step back because the Tories have crashed the economy.
Labour made the claim that it was 28 billion from the first year of government. They're now not doing that, and that has upset and angered people.
Because the Tories crashed the economy, and we've got to adjust to different circumstances. In truth, we were always going to ramp up throughout the lifetime of a parliament. You can't spend 28 billion in the first year.
That wasn't the truth when it was first announced.
Well, no, we've consistently said that we would spend that over the course of two parliaments.
From the first year of Labour being in government.
Yeah, but look at our retrofitting policy, for example. We're going to retrofit 19 million homes, but the capacity currently isn't there in the SME sector in order to do it. So we'll spend the first year ramping up the capacity, creating apprenticeships, making sure that we can help SMEs to expand, and we'll start that work as soon as we can. We know there's an urgency to this situation. We've had 13 years of disintegration of our public services, and we know that we need to start quickly. We intend to hit the ground running, but what we'll never do is make promises that we can't keep. We've had enough of that in politics.
I'm going to ask you this very finally.
OK.
Is this the last time we're going to see you in this role as Shadow Housing Secretary? I read that you and Angela Rayner are about to be booted out of the Shadow Cabinet.
Well, look, I've been through a lot of reshuffles in my time and long enough to know that most of what is written about them, it turns out to be complete rubbish. I've done two quite challenging jobs on the front bench in the last 3 years since Keir became leader. I've enjoyed them enormously, and I'll continue to do that because the only thing that I really hate about all the jobs I've held on the front bench over the last 13 years is the word shadow in front of the title. So we'll pull together as a team, we'll go out and fight with everything we've got to win the next election, and then we'll set about sorting out the mess that the Tories have left.
Thank you for your time. Good to see you. Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Housing, Local Government and Communities Secretary, with us here on LBC. You're listening to Tom Swarbrick. It's 5 o'clock. These are the headlines.
We are standing with them, and allies are doubling down in their support.
Rishi Sunak insists that NATO's commitment to support Ukraine are not a substitute for membership.
If all 4 unions get over the result, then you're going to see massive disruption in the run-up to Christmas.
Teachers in England represented by the Nasuit vote for walkouts over pay, workload and working hours.
I know the individual concerned. I am very worried about his state of mind.
BBC colleagues urge an unnamed presenter accused of paying a teenager for explicit images to speak out. And
we heard some incredibly heartbreaking stories about people for whom there are just no options when they come to remortgage.
Almost 1 million households expected to see their monthly mortgage payments rise by £500. One bank boss, though, says you'll be fine. Is he right?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 5 o'clock, the Defence Secretary has